When the kids were singing, I think when they're not staring at 100 people, they know the song's just a little bit better, right? I also just wanted to say, thanks to Adria. Adria, we appreciate you coming to the book. Shannon and I have known and been friends with Adria and her husband Chad, and they're awesome little daughter friendly who joined us for VBS for quite a while. She's on the staff over at Brave Church there, and works with their worship there as well. So thanks so much. But I don't know. I had a fun time this week at VBS. You see a bunch of us wandering around in our VBS shirts here. A bunch of our leaders were up here singing with the kids, and it was so much fun. I know Kathy shared with you a few of the things that happened this week, but I think we've got a great slide that shows a few of them as well, because I just wanted to share with you what God had been doing in this church this week. So we had over 50 kids that joined us for VBS this week. I put a slide up early, so I didn't quite know how much money we had raised for Uganda. But that was so much fun. Is Lydia in here right now? Lydia, hey! Lydia was awesome. She got up here every day and gave a presentation about Uganda and about their time there. And our kids brought in a bunch of money to help raise money for the school so that they can have kind of their next school being built up there. 46 Band-Aids on tiny little scratches. That was my favorite part. I can't tell you how many Band-Aids I handed out this week, but what I can tell you is there was no blood ever. You get a sticker and you get a sticker, everybody can have one. It was just a blast. We loved every bit of it. So I just wanted to say thanks so much to everybody who had a part in it and helped serve our kids this week and just throw a party with them. We had a lot of fun decorations, but for me, this was the funnest one for me. You can't see it too well. I don't know if it spins around easily, so we don't worry about it. But you see, some of these have holes in them, and then some of them have super cool little stickers put over it. And this was our sail that was broken because we were shipwrecked. I didn't actually pay that much attention to my wife as she was teaching, so I might botch some of the story, right? But it was the sail, and God was going to rescue us. And so the way that happened is every day this week, our kids would write down what they called a God sighting. It was just somewhere that they had seen God during the week. And then they came up and they put stickers on this. So if you can see, it's full all the way over here and all the way over here. And these are just a bunch of times that the 50 kids that were running around in here this week said, "There's God. I see God right there." And it was so much fun to just kind of hang out in the groups and listen to them say that sort of stuff. But it also kind of got me thinking, right? Because we have a lot of these God sightings that we see all around us if we're looking for them. But we also kind of only talk about them when we come into church, right? And so we had a bunch of these kids who wear these little bracelets that says "Watch for God Sightings." And if they weren't going to church and they weren't watching for their little God sightings, I'm not sure how many times they would have seen them. And what kind of struck me this week, and I hope it's okay to be a pastor who says this, but is how weird church is sometimes. Is that okay to say? Like a bunch of us gather together here, and Andrew did a great job leading us in worship here, but we sing some weird songs, And then all of you are sitting there staring at some weird guy in a t-shirt with a beard that's just, you don't know what I'm going to say. But you came here and decided, listen, my uncle's laughing at me. That's a good time, right? And you're like, yeah, this looks like the guy I'd want to go sit down for half an hour on Sunday and listen to. That's kind of strange. And we gather together, and in the church world we call this a worship service. Right? Two words that really are pretty packed, pretty loaded with meaning. We're going to get here and we're going to worship. Well, what does it actually mean to worship, right? And then as a service implies we're serving somebody or something. And so what I want to talk a little bit about this morning is just the first part of that. It's a worship service. What does it mean that we're going to get together here and worship together? And, you heard Phil last week, and he opened up with a great message, just kind of saying, what is worship? How do we do it here? What are the things that we like about what we do? What are the things that we just do because we've done forever and nobody ever told us that we shouldn't do it that way? Just thinking through some ideas, right? But this morning I want to talk about worship in a little bit bigger context. Maybe in the context of why it makes church strange. Because as we gather together here for our worship service, as you look around, there's like nothing that shows you what we're worshiping, right? We're just worshiping. And honestly, if you've never been to a church, if you're coming here this morning, I think the thing you probably most think is that we really love palm trees. Right? Maybe not, but there's a bunch of them up here. But it's just kind of strange to say, why are we gathering together? And there's like a hammock up on stage, a strange little sloth. We don't usually have that sort of stuff up here. But if you think about the stuff that we generally do have up here, it still doesn't really explain what we're worshiping. And so one of the things that I'm going to say to this morning and hopefully convince you of is kind of a two-part deal. And the first is that kind of all of us worship something. It's a little bit of, I think, a Christian pastoral cliche. So hopefully we'll decide it by the end of the morning it's right. But the second part is that it's that object of worship. It's not the way that we worship at all, but it's the object of worship that makes all the difference in the world. But I think it's kind of difficult to convince people sometimes that you actually do worship something, right? There's lots of us in here who say, yeah, we worship God all the time. That's the way that we live our life. There's some of us that say, well, I try to do that, and so it probably happens a few times during the week. There's some of you that you say, of course I worship God. I come to church like once a month, and I get to sing the songs, and so yeah, I worship God. There's some of you that say, that's a stupid idea. I'm not sure what you're talking about, but I don't want to be a part of it, right? And so this morning, what I want to do is see if we can't convince you that everybody worships and worships something, and then maybe talk about how we choose that thing. So there's this guy, he passed away a few years ago, took his own life. His name is David Foster Wallace, and he an amazing author, Pulitzer Prize-winning author, and one of his most famous speeches is a commencement speech at Kenyon College called This Is Water. And there's a line in it. This guy isn't a particularly religious guy at all. You read through some of his writings, and he talks a lot about going to church, and he's always going to church. But for him, the only thing that he meant when he said he's going to church is his AA meetings. That was the place where he said, yeah, that's where I need to be, and lots of people say you need to be in church, so I'll call that my church. But I think we've got this up here behind me, but I just want to read it. I want you to listen to the words of somebody that for a long time spoke for a bit of a generation in his writings, and spoke not from a Christian perspective, but much more of a secular philosophical perspective. So he said, because here's something that's weird but true. In the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there's actually no such thing as atheism. There is no such thing as not worshiping. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship. And the compelling reason for choosing some sort of God or spiritual type thing to worship, be it JC, I just like to call it that, or Allah, be it Yahweh or the wicked mother goddess or the Four Noble Truths or some unavoidable set of ethical principles, is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive. If you worship money and things, if they are what you tap real meaning in life, then you will never have enough. You will never feel you have enough. It's the truth. Worship your body and beauty and the sexual allure, and you will always feel ugly. And when time and age start showing, you will die a million deaths before they finally leave you. On one level, we know this stuff already. It's been codified as myths, proverbs, cliches, epigrams, parables, the skeleton of every great story. The whole trick is keeping the truth up front in daily consciousness. Worship power, you will end up feeling weak and afraid. You will need even more power over others to numb your own fear. Worship your intellect, being seen as smart, and you will end up feeling stupid, a fraud, always on the verge of being found out. But the insidious things about these forms of worship is not that they're evil or sinful, it's that they're unconscious, they're default settings. They're the kind of worship that you just gradually slip into, day after day, getting more and more selective about what you see and how you measure value without ever being fully aware that's what you're doing. And it's an interesting quote where he just goes through and says, we're all in the business of worshiping. Sure, church is weird, right? We gather together to worship this. But there's also this strange thing going on right now. I don't pay a lot of attention to it, but there's this little white ball that a bunch of people are kicking all over the place right now, right? The World Cup. And if you watch, that is definitely a worshipful experience for so many people, right? And they're just sitting there screaming and chanting. And it's easy for me to make fun of that because I don't do it at all. And I'm not going to do that until September when real football starts. Yeah, exactly. But there's this thing where we all have something that we worship. But when you put the word worship to it, it just becomes a weird Christian cliche. So here's what I want to say instead, is the thing that you worship is the thing that you put in first place in your life. Right? We've all got something that we say, that takes first place. And it doesn't mean that you can't like anything else. I think sometimes that's what gets preached when somebody gets up front and says, you can't have any other gods before our God. You can't worship anything else. You can't have anything else. And in some ways that's true, but it doesn't mean you can't spend time or enjoy anything else. Right in September, when football finally starts up, we'll overuse this one, right? I'll worship the Broncos a little bit on a Sunday, right? I will love them. But it's not like they're the only team I'm going to enjoy. I'm going to enjoy anybody that's playing against the Steelers. I'm going to enjoy anybody that's playing against the Patriots. I'm going to enjoy anybody that can make Philip Rivers cry. So there's lots of people that I'll say, oh yeah, they're up there as well. They're not first place in my book. And that's how it works. And I think there's a great passage. We're going to turn to Acts 19 and hang out there for a little while this morning. Because the things that we talk about and that we laugh about today, the things that David Foster Wallace talked about 10, 12 years ago at a commencement speech, are the exact same things that they've been discussing for 2,000 years. And sometimes it feels a little silly knowing that, we haven't moved any further than what they were talking about 2,000 years ago. And at the same time, it makes me feel great to know that the way that I'm worshiping now is how they were worshiping back then. So we're going to be looking at Acts chapter 19, starting in verse 23. And I'm going to kind of read through, I'm going to read through it just a little bit and hopefully explain it as we go. Because it's just a short snippet here. But I think it's so loaded with some awesome truths that we might not catch on in everyday life, but still have great significance. So it starts in verse 23, and it just says, about that time, there arose a great disturbance concerning the way. They don't even know what to call Christians back then. It's too new. And there's just this new thing that's happening, and we're going to find later on there's this guy named Paul, and he's told way too many people about Jesus, and everybody's excited about him, and that's causing a lot of troubles for people. But what I think is great is they just call it the way. Right? And this harkens back a little bit to Jesus' own words in John chapter 14. It says, Jesus answered, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Back then, Christians were known for being the ones that had a way, that had a path to get to heaven. That's all they were known for. My guess is if we took a poll of people who weren't in the church and said, what are Christians known for? It's not going to be real high on our list these days. But that's a sermon for a completely separate Sunday. Okay, verse 24. A silversmith named Demetrius, who made silver shrines of Artemis, brought in a lot of business for the craftsmen there. I think we know where this is gonna head, right? You've got this guy that makes these statues of this cool little god named Artemis, and he makes a lot of money doing it. And these people that are following the way are ruining his business. I think if we look at the things that we worship, that's an easy way to tell what they are. Where does our money go? Right? Our entire culture is built around us worshiping different things. I've made fun of myself a little bit for worshiping the Broncos, but my wife and I actually take that worship of the Broncos fairly seriously. We can laugh at the people in here, but we do the same thing. Shannon and I have invented our own holiday. And our kids know that it's coming every year. On the first Bronco game of the year, we open presents at our house. It's a true thing, right? We always go and we get some new silly Broncos things. And they just get so excited that it's like, is this the first game? No, son, that's preseason. That's not quite the real thing. Our holiday doesn't start until the first actual kickoff, right? And they just look forward to it. Well, we do the same things in our church here. We do the same thing in our world, right? People are already excited about where the next World Cup is going to be. Right? And I thought I'd heard that, in a few years. I really don't follow soccer at all, but it gets to be here. And people were just, oh my goodness, yes. The place where they worship is going to be close to me. All right? And we're going to make a lot of money about that, too. People are going to be selling all sorts of weird stuff. Just like this guy named Demetrius that was a silversmith. Verse 25, he called them together along with the other workers in related trades and said, you know, my friends, we receive a good income from this business. And you see and hear how this fellow Paul has convinced and led astray a large number of people in Ephesus and in practically the whole province of Asia. And listen to this next verse, it's amazing. He says that gods made by human hands are no gods at all. The nerve, right? He says that just because somebody invented football a few decades ago, it's not a real thing, and I shouldn't worship it. I said church was kind of weird. I don't understand a lot of the stuff that we do here, right? And this church has been a new experience for me. There's lots of things that happen in this church that I don't understand still. I think I'm figuring them out. But I remember the first few times I came, and right after offering, whoever was on our piano would hit a key, and everybody would stand up for this doxology. And that was just bewildering to me. You know? How do they all know that's when they're supposed to stand up? Nobody here looks at the screen for the words or even on the piece of paper. Everybody knows them. And I don't really know why we're singing this. This is just strange, you know? But then I started looking into it a little bit. When I say looking into it, I looked at Phil and I said, that's weird. Why do you do that, you know? and Phil's response was just great. You know, it was first, he wasn't patronizing at all, but I imagine he wanted to just kind of pat me on the head. That's cute, Jeff. Let me help you out here, you know? He didn't let on at all, but I know that was his feeling. And he just said, you know what? This is a service where we want people to be aware that they're giving back to God. And so as they bring the offering forward, I just want to stop in the middle of every service and look and say, God, we give all the thanks to you. And we know that everything we have that's good comes from you. So it's a great reminder to stop in the middle and say, thanks to God from whom all blessings flow. And then the next thing he said was great. He says, Jeff, you have no idea how long they've been singing this same song in churches all over. And for me, that's what's great about the church, is because we do the same thing here all the time. Right? Like I have a bunch of my family, I don't know exactly where they are, but there's just tons of them over here, right? And they were showing up, and you know, we got people that are elders all over the place, and they've gone to school way longer than I could dream of, and it just, you know, all sorts of things, and people in our family would say, I'm not a big fan of church, you know, that's kind of a weird thing. And so I was thinking, man, maybe I need to come like with this big, new, exciting kind of message. And then I realized there's nothing new here, right? Like what I'm teaching is the same thing that was being taught in this very church long before I was born, which is strange because some of you were here that Sunday, right? and what I'm saying this morning is going to be being taught in this church long after I'm gone. And in this book, well, you know, it's not a book, but where he says, they say gods made of human hands are no gods at all. That's awesome. I don't have to worry about worshiping a God made of human hands. I can say the same thing that was causing a disturbance for this random guy named Demetrius 2,000 years ago is the same thing that was being taught here before I was around, is the same thing that will be being taught here after I'm gone, and it's the exact same thing I'm talking about right now. So while church might be weird, it's also in great company. Because there are all sorts of people all over the world right now that are gathering together saying, Jesus, we love you. And you get first place with us. And we do it all sorts of different ways, right? But that's what so many people in so many different places are doing right now. And that just makes me feel awesome. Except for, but it keeps going, right? He doesn't stop there. In the next verse, verse 27, he says, there is also danger that our trade will lose its good name. I'm sorry, there is danger not only that our trade will lose its good name, but also that the temple of the great goddess Artemis will be discredited. And the goddess herself, who is worshipped throughout the province of Asia and the world, will be robbed of her divine majesty. In some ways, I think this is one of the most honest statements in the whole Bible. Think about the implications of that. If we stop worshiping this goddess Artemis, we will rob her of her divine majesty. It's not really a god if you can steal its divine majesty, right? That means it's not divine anymore. I've been getting to, I'm making fun of soccer a lot, but I've been getting a lot more pressure about soccer in the last few years than ever in my life. I kind of grew up thinking it was the sport that people cared about until they learned there was football. That's the way that it is. But I now go to school in England, and once you cross over that pond, they really don't care about football at all. Kind of like their version of football, but it's really soccer, and they're all excited. And so I have a professor that I work with, used to work with over there a lot, and he moved to America. And so he had been living in England for, 10, 15 years, but he is German, grew up in Germany, and so he loves soccer, and it's a little bit of an awkward deal. And so he tells me all the time, we gotta go to a pub and watch soccer. And it's like, oh, you're in the wrong country. We don't do either of those things here, right? But he really gets excited about it. Then I had another friend write me this week, and I felt like I was in a little bit better spot because I'm understanding the soccer thing. And he asked me to play in, I just called it fantasy football for soccer. I didn't know what we were going to pick, but pick who gets eliminated, or it's March Madness, but it occurs every 4 years, something. And so I write him back, and he's like, I don't really want to do that at all. But he's a good friend, so I couldn't just nicely dismiss it. I had to make fun of him with it a little bit, right? That's what friends do. So I said, I heard this story about the way soccer works. It was somebody that actually, the way I heard the story, said this just a few weeks ago as they're watching soccer. A little kid in England, a little confused. And he says, hey, if the goalie is allowed to hold the ball, this is the joke that I write to my friend, the goalie's allowed to hold the ball, why doesn't he just pick the ball up and run it all the way across to the field to the other side? That seems to be a lot easier. And you respond with, when we figured that out, it's now called football, and it's a lot more fun to watch, right? So I email that to my friend, and he emails back more than a little perturbed, right? Yeah. But that's what's going on here. They say, hey, if you don't care about our god Artemis, you rob her of her divine majesty. If I have a friend that invites me to participate in a soccer thing, and I'm like, sorry, I think soccer is stupid, he gets his feelings hurt, because that's part of who he worships, and he's worried that soccer isn't going to be as important if not everybody worships it. So what about our God? What if we decide, Jesus, you're not worth worshiping? Jesus, all of us are leaving here today, and we've all decided we're not going to worship you anymore. How is our God impacted like that? Because the truth is, and here's the scary bit, if our God is impacted the same way as Artemis, or the same way as soccer, then we don't really serve God at all. If his divine majesty can be robbed. Well, the great thing is, there used to be these people that wandered around near Jesus all the time called the Pharisees, and they were just always upset at him for everything. And so one time they came up to him and they said, hey, all your people are a little too excited about God. Tell them to stop singing quite so loud. There were a few times I don't want to tell the kids that this week, but they were having a blast, right? So they came up and they told Jesus this in Luke 19. And in Luke 19:37 it says, when he came near the place where the road goes down to Mount Olives, the whole crowd of disciples began to joyfully praise God in loud voices for all the miracles they had seen. Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven, glory in the highest. And it says, some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to Jesus, Teacher, rebuke your disciples. And listen to what Jesus says about what would happen if we all stopped worshiping. He says, I tell you, he replied, if they keep quiet, the stones will cry out. Oh, that's awesome. That's a big difference, right? There's a big difference between saying, we got to stop these people because if they stop worshiping Artemis, she's going to be robbed of her divine glory. And then somebody says, it's no big deal if you stop worshiping Jesus. Everything is part of his creation, and if the people don't do it, the rocks will. It's a guy that's not really afraid of our response, right? But it keeps going. Kind of the last verse that we're going to talk about, verse 28. When they heard this, they were furious and began shouting, Great is Artemis of the Ephesians. And it says this continued for 2 hours. That's some excited worship, right? If I could say it, it's probably a lot more excited worship than we have here. And so here's my question for us this morning. If we've kind of gone through all this and we've said, it's only the object of your worship that matters. Right? And if things like Artemis and soccer, and unfortunately the Broncos, don't really count, and it's only Jesus that counts, we have to take an inventory and say, what do we worship? Because there are a lot of us in here that worship a lot of great things. You can worship your country, right? You can worship the military. You can decide that you want to worship your family. You can worship yourself. There's so many things that you can worship that on the surface seem like really good things. There's even some of us in here that probably worship our church more than we worship our God, right? We got to have things in the right order. We got to do things a particular way. And the way that we worship even becomes more important than who we worship. But does any of those other things matter, right? Like if you decide to worship your country, you're probably only happy about half the time, right? If the right guy's in that egg-shaped office, then you're doing good. And if the wrong one is, you can't stand anything. If you worship your family, and they like you, then things are great. But what happens if they don't? You can expect things from your family and they can expect things from you. And as long as those two are equal, then everybody's happy. I got my wife here, and she loves me to death. Nobody is sure why, but she really does, right? But if I just decided one day I didn't love her anymore at all, I was just going to go find somebody else, what would that do to our relationship, right? And then I'd say, oh, I'm sorry. I ran away from you. I thought somebody else was better, but I'm back now. She loves me a lot. There's a chance she might take me back. And then I do that 20 more times. Right? So even if you are worshiping family, even if family takes first place in your life, that only works if expectations are met. Right? We worship Jesus. Well, what happens if we don't do the right things for Jesus? What happens if we kind of say, I really don't care about you at all, right? The funny thing is, he did everything for us before we got a chance to do anything. In Romans chapter 5, he says, Romans chapter 5, verses 6 through 8. He says, you see, just at the right time, while we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person, someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. I used to work in youth ministry, working with students. And I would talk to them all the time about who do you want to follow? Right? And what have they done for you? And oftentimes you want to follow the popular crowd at school, or the people who you idolize, or these sorts of things. What
have they done for you? Of course, usually the answer was nothing. And then he's saying, what has Jesus done for you? Right? And there's always the thought that after you ask Jesus for forgiveness, he forgives you. But that's actually not the way that it works at all. Right? And I always ask students, when did Jesus forgive you? And to be honest, when I started asking that question, I didn't really think it was a trick question. But I never had anybody that answered it right. So I was like, well, maybe it is, right? And they'd come up with all sorts of answers. None of them would really get it. And then I'd say, how did he forgive you? And the answer to how he forgave us was always obvious. He died on the cross. He says, you're supposed to be punished, but I'm going to take your place. Wait, when did he do that? Right? 2,000 years ago, we've all done a whole bunch of stuff that we shouldn't have done. And it's not like God is waiting around seeing if it adds up to too much before he says, I'm going to forgive you. 2,000 years ago, knowing full well what we would all do, he says, I'll die for you. And that's why we worship our God. Right? The order of events is really important. One of the things that my mother has decided, I don't see. Hey, she's short. One of the things that my mother has decided we should do, since there's all of our family is around, is we're going to the museum tomorrow. And I went with a couple of the guys as well, Ray, and I don't know if Ron is here, and probably a few others that I forget, to the museum a couple of months ago to see all these Dead Sea Scrolls, right? Which was kind of fun because I spent a little bit too much time studying them. But one of the funny things about it is when you look at the Ten Commandments, they write the Ten Commandments differently than we do. Right? So if we were to come up with a list of what our commandments are, the first one will be, have no other gods before me or something like that. That's not so when you go to the museum. Because the museum says that they are fancy Jewish commandments because it's Dead Sea Scrolls are only the Old Testament. And the Hebrew people, the Israelites, they see the Ten Commandments differently than we do. They count them different. For them, the first commandment is different than what we say it is. They started off and they say the first commandment is, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. For them, the first commandment includes the fact that God rescued them. And I think that's important for us to remember, is that as we're choosing this object, who we decide to worship, is it more important that we decide that we get to control the object that we worship, right? That it's a God made of human hands. Or if we're going to start this next song and we're going to worship our God, is it more important to choose a God who we say, not only does he not expect from us, but that he's already done for us everything that needs to be done long before we were even born. And so this week as you go out and you're trying to see what takes first place in your life, realize that for God, we've already taken first place in his life. We took first place high enough that he said, I'll hang on a cross for you. Let's pray. Jesus, we love you. Thank you for who you are, for what you've done for us, for what you continue to do for us. God, we just ask that you would help us see the place that you have in our life and the place that you need to have in our life. We love you. In your name we pray. Amen.